between chapter 22, chapter 26 of the book of Acts, all telling us, written by Luke, of Paul's transition, Paul's conversion. But when Paul actually writes about his conversion, he does so only in the letter to Galatians. And he says, I had an encounter with the risen Christ. And what always blows my mind, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone really talk about it, is, so he has this conversion, right? And you think, the risen Jesus, wow. He goes away for 14 years. He has the vision and goes away for 14 years. Where does he go? It says to Arabia. And in the ancient world, when you're thinking of Arabia, you're thinking of the desert. So there's this conversion, this momentous event. And Paul says, I need to go to the desert. And I find that so profound, and sometimes I really trip up my undergraduate students because we'll go over the conversion story, and then when we get to the final exam in class, without prepping them, I'll say, why 14 years? And yeah, why 14 years? What was that encounter like? Why did he go to the desert? He had just had an encounter with the risen Christ. And he goes off for 14 years. Now, he doesn't really tell us why he goes, but he was a Pharisee. And he was a zealous Pharisee. And he was doing his thing. A Hebrew amongst Hebrews. A scholar of the law. More ambitious than any of his colleagues. And then one day, boom, everything switched. Everything changed. And I tell my students at LMU, let's stop reading Scripture like a comic strip. These are human beings, flesh and blood human beings. This guy was a Pharisee who persecuted. Now all of a sudden he's going to show up and say, here I am, guys. I'm part of the 12. Excuse me? That's like me showing up in Congress tomorrow and saying I'm one of the congressmen from California. Where do you get off? And what did it do to him as an idealistic, law-abiding Jew to have his life completely transformed? He went to the desert because the desert will purify you. The desert will purify you. It'll also protect you. And it'll also challenge you. So the desert has been on my mind. I think of the desert fathers and mothers. The church was growing in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century. And finally, under Constantine, it becomes the church of the empire. But yet, there was a small fraction of the faithful who went to the desert. You familiar with the desert fathers and mothers? Have you heard of them? Monastics, the early monastics, they just went out to the desert. They could have been in Jerusalem, they could have been in Rome, they could have been in Antioch, but they chose to go to the desert. And why? Why the desert? Why isolation? These are questions, and I'm asking the questions rhetorically, but in my mind, in my heart, I'm wondering, what is the draw of the desert? And as Tim mentioned, I think we all experience metaphorical deserts in our lives. And as I tell, actually myself, trying to come to terms with this notion of desert, when you think of the desert, you think harsh, hot, difficult to maintain life. But if you spend time in the desert, there's also beauty. There are oases and there are mirages, right? There's beauty in the desert, and that draws people out to the desert. But the other part of it is there's that polishing aspect, and I think it's the rough times that bring us to deserts. To take some time out to find a desert, to find some space to encounter God. So this particular Bible study class that we'll be going, Frank, is it 10 weeks? 10 weeks. We're going to go through the book of Exodus. And I would imagine, myself included, because I told you I'm not an Old Testament scholar, I'm a New Testament scholar. What forms your greatest opinion or source of knowledge of the Ten Commandments? Be honest now. Be honest now. Tim, do you know? Moses? But wouldn't you say Charlton Heston as Moses? Right? Right? You know, when I'm reading Exodus, I've got, Edward G. Robinson and Paul Newman in?
Oh no, I'm sorry, Kirk Douglas. Or that's Spartacus.
That was Spartacus. Don't confuse me. Don't confuse me. So, a few weeks ago, I taught all summer long and I teach all year long. I decided that I was going to go on a little pilgrimage. And so I went up to the Carmel area. I'm a golfer, and I went golfing up in the Carmel region. And then when that was done, 3 or 4 days of that, I went to a monastery up there. Camaldoli? The Camaldoli Monastery. Hermitage. And it had to be, I swear to you, Big Sur, it had to be 100 degrees every day. And I was in one of those little, the 9 rooms that are, that brick, what do you call those bricks?
Cinder block?
Cinder block. And the sun would beat on those every day. And I swear to you, by the time you went to bed, it was 120 degrees. It was a desert. And, my car's sitting 20 feet away, and I'm thinking, man, I could sleep good with that air conditioning blowing. But I decided I was there for a reason. The only change that I did make was I would sleep in the church at night because they had overhead fans, and that offered some relief. People ask you, what did you do? All day no one speaks. They lay out food a couple times a day and you eat. I read Exodus. I had no idea we were going to do this. But I read Exodus, and I prayed, and I contemplated, and I prayed the rosary. Because I slept in the church, I was awakened every morning at 4:30 a.m. by the monks there, preparing for 5 a.m. service. And it was purifying, and it gave me some insight as to the harshness of the desert that can lead to life and encounter with God. I'm a good polytheist here. No, to God. So, Exodus. That's where you're headed. And when you think about Exodus, and I think about Exodus, what an important text for slaves brought to the Americas in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. Something about faith in captivity, listening for God's word. As I began to read Exodus, that was on my mind. My African American, my African brothers and sisters, this text meant something to them. So as you read, David, keep that in mind. So I began my encounter with Exodus, and it strikes me, Egypt. Egypt is such an important place in early Christianity and in Judaism. And I don't want to over-rehearse the story because you're going to go over it for the next 10 weeks. But I think we can talk about the obvious in the text. I mean, Moses is born. He's placed in a basket and sent down the Nile. He's scooped up. Eventually he's raised in the house of royalty, and then he leaves. And he's in the desert. And he encounters God. We're told that God appeared in a burning bush, had an encounter, said that he'd heard the cries of his people, and he tasked Moses to deliver them. And Moses says, who do I say? Who do I say sent me? What's your name? And that's a really interesting thing to ask God. And God says, I am. I am. Which is interesting because when the Pharisees asked Jesus, are you the Messiah, the Son of the living God? He says, I am. He invokes the name of God at that moment. So here you have Moses now tasked to go to the house of Pharaoh to deliver God's people. And you know the story. Pharaoh doesn't buy it, and whatever is sent to detract, to allow the Israelites to go, Pharaoh fights back, says no, hard head, hard heart. And to the firstborn male children of every Egyptian family is killed. And the angel of death spares the Israelite children because of the blood of the lamb that was put over the doors. And they're told to leave in haste, and we now have the foundations for the Jewish holiday Passover, because the angel of death passed over. And if I haven't done so already, let me offer you the greetings of Lashana Tova. Happy New Year to you. The year 5779 in the Jewish calendar is now upon us, 2 days old, and will culminate next Tuesday with the beginning of, does anyone know what Jewish? Not Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where most Jews will fast for 25 hours. So, the book of Exodus is so foundational to Judaism and the Mosaic covenant and God leading God's people out of Egypt with the help of the prophet Moses. And then you get to the desert, and that's where I'd like to spend a little time tonight. If I was going to give this talk tonight a subtitle, it would be, There Are No Roads in the Desert. Moses leads God's people out into the desert, and they are told that they will be taken to a land that will be theirs, the promised land. But for 40 years, they venture. And things happen along the way, don't they? First, as I was reading it, it said that God led the people with a pillar that was a cloud in the day and a pillar of fire at night. So there is a godly manifestation that all of these people get to see every day. It's a manifestation. It's a theophany. And yet still, they are having some issues in believing. And you know what? I want to say, what were you thinking? But look at Peter. You know this guy, right? No, I don't know. How did he do this miracle? Well, you've been watching him all along. So again, let's read in a manner that is mature in the sense that, and I tell my students, think, they say, well, why didn't they understand? He's doing this, Jesus is doing that. And I said, what if you were at the swimming pool here at LMU and a kid started walking around on the water? And I said, would you immediately say, well, that's the Messiah, the third person of the Trinity, or the second person in the Trinity. I want to honor these people for allowing them to have their minds blown by an encounter with the living God. And that's Paul, right? We started off with Paul. You know, Jesus, who are you, Lord? I'm Jesus. Why are you persecuting me? Why are you persecuting my people? And instead of Paul saying, there it is, there's the mandate, let's go out, let's do this. Man, let me get the hell out of here and wrap my head around this and then try to explain to Mom that I'm now a Catholic missionary or a Christian missionary. Oy vey, right? You know, the encounter with God is more complex than I think we give it credit for when we read the text, especially when we read the text. You know, so Jesus spit on his fingers and gets some mud and puts it over a person's eye. Oh, yeah, another great miracle. But imagine if you were there. So these people, I don't know, I think I read 100,000, 400,000, 400,000 people are being led through the desert. There's no highways. And, you know, I don't know if that's an accurate map, but I would imagine people after 40 years walking in this area of the world probably said, I've seen that mountain before. Where are you taking us? Why are we here? What's going on? What are you doing? How do I trust you? Who is your God? I am. Who is this I am? So let's go back to old habits. Let's go back and worship the gods of the territories here. Let's worship the gods of the Canaanites. Let's worship the gods of the Jebusites. Let's build that golden calf. As Moses is away receiving the 10 Commandments, he comes back to find that. The desert is a tough place. It is a challenging place. And for 40 years, they wandered. 400,000 people. Water coming out of rocks. Bread descending from heaven. And they still had issues. Now, I think we can read this story on multiple levels. I would say, you know, it kind of sounds like my life. How many times does God have to be present in my life and then something goes wrong and where's God in that? And then you fall for all the mirages in the desert. You hear me? You know, you reach a point. The mirage, this is going to solve everything. And it's false, and it's empty. But on the other side, you have the oases. And usually you have to work to find the oases. They just don't appear. You have to grind it out. And then you find the oases, and then what do you find? You find living water in the desert. So, the reason this particular text has meant so much to me is because I have been walking through a desert really for my whole life, but I discovered 2 years ago that I was really in a desert and over my head. And many of you know me in this room. My marriage of 25 years ended. And there I was, and I stood at the precipice of a desert. 2 beautiful children that now I have to pull myself away from and live in a separate home. And I sat there. Where are you, God? And how could this happen? And where's my liberation? And what have I done? And then I said, you know what, David? Shut up and just start walking. Just get up and walk. And I started to walk. And I had no idea where I was headed. I had no idea. But I woke up every day and I walked. And as a matter of fact, if you come to my apartment, I live downtown, I have a little basin right at my front door. And inside that basin, there's a rock and there's sand. And there's a rosary in that. And as I walk out, I touch the sand. And I say, God, lead me through my desert today. Lead me through my desert today. So every day I wake up, that's my prayer. Lead me through my desert. And you know what? I have found flowers in my desert. I have found rain in my desert. I have found sunsets in my desert. I have found wildlife in my desert. I have found the beauty of the desert. But I've also been scorched by the desert. I've also been tricked by mirages in the desert. I've gone down dead-end paths in the desert. So this book of Exodus resonates deeply with me. It has given me hope. Because, and Frank mentioned this 2 weeks ago, he mentioned that prayer, footprints. You're walking in the sand and all of a sudden there's only one set of footprints and you ask God, why'd you bail on me? Where were you? What happened? I was carrying you. I've been carried in this desert. No doubt about it. There is no doubt about it. So the Israelites, I get them. I want to say there was a pillar, a God-given pillar that led you. There was food falling from heaven. There was water coming out of rocks. There was a prophet in your midst. There was a prophet in your midst. There was a prophet who delivered the commandments of God to you. First pressure point in that journey, they're building their golden calves. So I think it's fair for us. I think it's fair for us as people of faith to not be so hard on ourselves, because that's the journey, right? It's the journey. And I'll tell you, for me, I know I'm going to stumble, but I'm going to get up every day and I'm going to walk. I'm going to get up every day and I'm going to walk. And I'm going to begin that day by saying, Lord, I don't know where I'm going, but lead me. And one of the things it's taught me to do, and maybe I've even gotten this from the book of Exodus itself, is it's taught me to slow down. It's taught me to make my relationships more present. When I speak to another human being, I speak to another human being. I don't text as much. I'm not always running to my computer. I spend a lot more time praying. I spend a lot more time meditating. Because the example I got from the Israelites is that sometimes you get tricked by mirages. And I still do. I'm no example for anyone. I just am who I am. Yeah, that almost sounds like God. I am who I am. I just am who I am. But this text has grabbed me by the heart. Again, I'm not an Old Testament scholar, but yet I have found my solace in the Old Testament with a people that was in bondage. Monsignor told me as I was taking my first steps in this very difficult desert, he said, David, everyone has a desert. You're not alone. Everyone has a desert. The question is, how are you going to walk yours? So as you go through the book of Exodus, watch and listen and hear and feel, palpate what these individuals are encountering in the desert. They walked through the Red Sea according to Scripture. How do you build a golden calf after that? I don't know, but I guess in some ways, metaphorically, I've walked through my life's Red Seas, and and then I've built my golden calves afterwards. Because I try to plan it out. I try to plan every step because I guess that makes me feel safe. And then it gets turned on your head. And the beauty then of just saying, here I am, Lord. I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk. Where are you going to take me? And hopefully I will slow down my life enough to listen to the promptings of your Holy Spirit. Tim, my presentations have really changed over the years, haven't they? I'm living life. I mean, when I first started, I had just gone out of grad school, and I guess I wanted to impress and would use words like, what was the word you used earlier that I had to look up? Erudite. Erudite. Yeah. And now it's just I'm just meeting the road every day. And Exodus is a meeting God on the road text. Well, I shouldn't even say road because there are no roads in the desert. We try to create roads, right? I want to get from here to here, and I wanted to do it in 2 years, and I want this to be the goal, and this is what it's going to look like, and this is God's plan. And the question is, as with Haydan, the question is, will you trust God to lead you? Will you trust God to lead you? The Israelites said, what the hell did you bring us out of Egypt for? Damn, at least we had food there. We had a place to sleep. We had a schedule. We had rituals, right? I mean, they had, and well, the script flipped on them. And now all of a sudden we're wandering. We're a wandering people. And God never said you're going to be wandering for 40 years. God said, just go. And I'm going to take you to the promised land. Well, a year passes, maybe 2 years pass, maybe a generation passes. They're burying people. They're burying their dead in the desert. Will you continue to walk with God over the duration of that lifetime? So for me, the lesson that I learned from Exodus, and if you look at Moses blows my mind. He was the prophet that led him out of Egypt. He didn't get to go and cross into the promised land. What do you learn from that? I sat and I contemplated that. Why? I mean, that's not a part of the book of Exodus. He doesn't get to enter once you get to the book of Deuteronomy. But still, it's part of the story. What happened to Moses? You would think Moses would enter the promised land. He would take the people victoriously. But the prophet was not allowed to enter the land. You know the lesson I learned from that? As cliche as this may sound, it's about the journey. It's not about the destination. And we're so destination bound. And our destination, if you use Buddhist terms, is a want. And want and desire is the root of all of our pain. And basically, the lesson I learned from Moses is you got to walk with God for 40 years. It may not have been where you wanted. It may not have ended up where you expected it. But you walked with God. And God fed you in the desert. And God gave you drink in the desert. And God manifested God's self in the desert. And that's a walk of faith. That's a walk of faith. God, I want this. Well, maybe not. Not this time. But why not? What have I done? Nothing. Just keep walking. Keep walking with me. It's a beautiful story. There's a lot to learn in the book of Exodus. You're going to read a lot of familiar stories. Like I said, we've talked about quite a few. The crossing of the Red Sea, the scooping of Moses out of the basket, Pharaoh's hard head and hard heart, the multiple plagues, the eventual death of the firstborn, the initiation of the Passover, the Exodus in haste with the unleavened bread, passing through the Red Sea closing upon the enemy, the Egyptians. For me, the story starts once they cross the Red Sea, because that's when the journey starts. That's when the journey of faith starts. Are you going to trust? Because sometimes it just doesn't seem like God is present with us. You can say that. You can say that. You know, say, well, we know God's present with us, but sometimes, damn it, it doesn't feel like it. I think that's when we need God most. I think that's when we need God most. When I pray the rosary, I've gotten, and my daughter said, man, you're so Catholic now, Dad. And I said, well, you know, my daughters, I need God. Because I'm walking through the desert. But, you know, when I pray my rosary, now I'm having a senior citizen moment. I forgot why I brought up my rosary. But anyway, my prayer for this group is, one, that you continue to come, and two, that you not only contemplate the exile of these 400,000 Hebrews, these 400,000 Israelites and their prophetic leader, but that you also contemplate your deserts and your faith journey. That was the power of Exodus for me. It was almost like holding a mirror up and just sitting there and saying, so God is in your life and God has manifested God's self in your life, but you're going to build a golden calf, you're going to pursue a mirage, you're going to try to solve it yourself because you think you can. And I got to tell you, human beings try to solve things sometimes in very self-destructive ways. Right? You know, you can numb, you can overindulge, you can do a lot of things. Those are the mirages. But will you live the ascetic life or the monastic life of the person of faith who will just come as you are and say, lead me? Because I'll tell you, there's not going to be any towers of cloud in front of you leading you. The Israelites were lucky, and they still fought that. And your path, your way will not be lit at night by a pillar of fire. Many times you will walk alone, and you will feel alone. But I encourage you to continue walking every day and say, Lord, lead me. I mean, I'm not so much teaching tonight as I'm giving a testimony tonight. This is my testimony. This is my encounter with the book of Exodus. It taught me that things can be tough. And even when you think and know that God is on your side, you're going to turn your back. You're going to make mistakes. You're human. You're human beings. Just like the prodigal son, wake up every day and just say, I'm coming home. I messed up. I know. Golden calf, we blew it. And maybe you'll reach a promised land. But maybe you won't. But if you live for the journey, then you've lived. Right? I'm a journey person. I always have been a journey person. Not the band. I never liked the band, but I'm a journey person. I'm sorry, I know that offends some of you out there. Yes, exactly. Steve Perry. But, I recall instances in my life when I have been exposed to people who are destination people, promised land people. They forfeit days of happiness because they can't be present in the moment because they're present in the future. And that can be a really hurtful way to live, not only to them, but to those around them. Because they're not journeying with you. They're not in compatible nature with you. I mean, it could be anyone. It could be your spouse. It could be your boss. It could be your best friend. It could be your children. The Exodus teaches me about being present every day, about the journey. Look at what they were exposed to on the journey. So much of God's goodness, God's judgment, God's leadership, God's compassion, God's patience. Thank God we have a patient God. Especially for this prodigal son. Especially for this prodigal son. So I wake up every day, my brothers and sisters, and I think about Exodus now. A New Testament scholar thinking about Exodus. But it's a text that resonates with me, as does the prodigal son. I see a lot of similarities in the two. Unlike Moses, the prodigal son reached his destination. And didn't he get confused and lost with mirages? Well, those mirages, they cry out loudly because they're instantaneous, but they're hollow. So I'll leave you with the thought that I wish you good journeys. I really wish you good journeys. And I leave you with the thought that, or at least the acknowledgement that journeys are tough. Journeys are tough. And those tough times are only a chapter. They're not a whole book. That there will be new chapters with joy, the love of God, the love of friends in your life. But like God is patient, we need to be patient. We need to be patient. Did the Spirit get you there? The cookie. The Spirit cookie. Be patient with yourselves and enjoy your journeys. And gird your loins every day. I don't even know what that means, but it sounds good. Gird your loins every day. And just go. And be the best person you can be. And allow yourself to fall and stumble. And you're going to be tricked by mirages. It's not that you're making the decision to pursue them. They just appear. And you're tricked, and before you know it, something's happened. But our God is a forgiving God, so you wake up the next day, one foot in front of the other. Just one foot in front of the other. 40 years. Wasn't Club Med. That was southern Egypt, northern Israel. I mean, those are tough times. And they walked. Hold up your tent. Grab your clan. Move forward. After 20 years, I can imagine they were saying, oh, hell no. I'm not following anymore. Because they were looking for the destination. They were destination people. But if you spoke up and said, man, I'm going to follow that cloud today. I'm going to eat that miraculous bread. I'm going to drink that miraculous water. I'm going to follow that man who turns a steak into a snake, who led us out of Egypt, who parted the Red Sea, or actually, God parted the Red Sea with prompting from Moses. But I think you're going to love this text. I think you're going to love this text because it's a familiar text. It's a Charlton Heston text. You're going to read it, and I know you're going to see Charlton Heston, right?
I will now.
Yeah, of course you will. You read it, and there's Charlton Heston, and he's familiar stories, central to our faith. But as mature individuals now, let the stories roll over your soul and say, yeah, look at that challenge that they encountered. I have my challenges. Look at the blessings that they encountered. I have my blessings. Look at how they took advantage of the blessing sometimes. I take advantage of blessings sometimes. Their story is our story. That's what I want you to know tonight. Their story is our story. We are walking blindly in faith, trusting God to lead us through this desert we call life, where we encounter mirages and oases on a daily basis. And if you calm yourself enough, maybe the prompting of the Holy Spirit will lead you in the direction you need to go. But you got to put down your damn cell phones. You do. I mean, we're losing a generation to technology, and it's hard to see. I teach at a university, and these kids cannot disconnect for an hour class. I would love to use technology in my class, but there's always folk who can't. And even when you put a technology rule in, they're still eyeballing because, I don't know, Instagram or Snapchat or whatever. I don't even use those apps. I'm still a Facebooker. But I'll tell you, I've learned some peace from putting that stuff down. After the election, I'm not being political here. I'm just telling you a story. My daughter, who was in high school, she was a freshman, sophomore. The students started texting once President Trump won, and there were people on both sides of the equation, and it got really heated. Girls at Mayfield, and I told my daughter, I said, when I was growing up, I could come home and be done with that. I said, but you guys are connected. You guys have to negotiate relationships 24/7. And I think it's hard to follow God through the desert if you're always distracted. And I tell my students, one of the things I wish them is some peace in the day. LMU's right next to the beach. Go sit on the beach for a little while. Meditate. Go sit on the bluff, watch the sunset. So part of your journey through your desert is to not walk into a cactus because you're texting. You can't see forward. So, thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me tell you about my path and discern my path in your midst. I don't so much feel I taught tonight, but I just gave a testimony tonight. God has held me these last 2 years. Friends have held me these last 2 years. And I'm trying not to forget that. And the Exodus story is reminding me. So thank you. It's good to see So many of you. Thank you.